So Marvel Comics has a new Doctor Doom, and it's pretty dope. So this is Dungeons of Doom, and for those of you guys who have forgotten about this story, it's an anthology series. This is the third issue, but the anthology series means it's a bunch of small stories inside of a single comic book. And so technically, we're going to kick off with the final story, which is where we get the new Doctor Doom, and then we'll jump back to the other one. So this one picks up with the Latvian freedom fighters, specifically with Boris. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, as grotesque as this guy's appearance is that in the first and second issues of Dungeons of Doom, specifically in the freedom fighter storyline, that because of the fact that Doom had been defeated, everybody's been basically trying to plunder whatever treasures he has. In this particular instance, the freedom fighters had basically opened a sarcophagus, and when that happened, this just grotesque creature came out and started attacking everybody. And while they were able to handle it, ultimately it attacked Boris. That led to Alexander killing Boris, but then Boris returned looking like he does right now. And that's why we're told the freedom fighters have known war. First, the war with Doom, then the war with the outside forces who would claim Latveria. Now they are at war with themselves, and war changes you. And so that's why you have them looking there and just kind of like, Boris, right? Like, what in the heck happened to you? Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that all we really know is that this is an eldritch creature of some kind, but there were theories going on, and it was one of them that I bought into, that the look of this thing is very similar to what would happen if one of the many angled ones were to basically possess a human being. Shuma Gorath is one of the many angled ones existing in the space between universes. Now, we don't definitively know that, but again, I think it's a pretty cool concept. All in all, it doesn't make that much of a difference though, because the freedom fighters are just kind of like, okay, we have to figure out some way to destroy Boris. The only holdout here is Fadir, right? From his perspective, he's like, I've already lost everything. I don't want to lose you either. Because keep in mind, Boris and Fadir were in a relationship with one another. But the problem with this is that's not Boris. It was at one point, but not anymore. Because this creature just grabs Fadir and just tears him to pieces, literally rips him apart and roars in the process. And if there were any possibility that Boris remained inside there, any potential part of himself that was in control, that's long since gone. And so that is when the voice of Katarina starts speaking to Alexander again. Now, that's another little subplot that we saw in this story, which was that the sister of Alexander had reappeared as a kind of spirit, right? And she's been talking to him the entire time. But she's been giving him some pretty shady advice the whole time. In fact, she's the one that told him to kill Boris in the first place. But the thing she says here is the Eye of Khonshu will see the secrets of everyone that you meet. You could hold the world hostage, Alexander. You could secure the future of Latveria. You could go from being a rebel on the run to a true leader seizing the global stage. But that will require sacrifice. And so she says, kill her. Kill Sophia. Of course, that being the girl in the red hair. Now, the Eye of Khonshu is one of the coolest things that's been introduced by Philip Kennedy Johnson in this particular storyline, because the Eye of Khonshu is an artifact that if you wield it, it basically grants you telepathy. It grants you the ability to see the inner thoughts and the inner experiences of people. Now, it is very different from telepathy in the sense that, as you probably imagine, telepathy takes time. You have to develop it, you have to learn how to filter out voices and different things like that. It took Jean Grey years to be able to figure out how to use her telepathy after the mental blocks were removed. But what the Eye of Khonshu does is it just shows you people's darkest secrets. Basically, it would give Alexander the ability to blackmail the world, which is exactly what Doctor Doom would do. And so that's why Katarina keeps telling him, right? Kill Sophia, take the eye. And so what ends up happening is Alexander just calls out to Sophia, throws a grenade and says, take cover, which of course this grenade ends up exploding and kills the monster and the whole 9 yards. But at that point, the monologue comes back in. The specter who whispered in his ear looked like his sister, Katarina, but as much as he wanted her to be real, his sister spent her days humming songs, drawing horses with crayons, and weaving flowers into her hair. She once made him nurse a bird who hit their window back to health. He was the one who carried violence and scars inside of him, and someone or something was trying to exploit that. If he fought for Katarina, he needed to fight for her life, not the death that the Dungeons of Doom had reeked of. And so that's where, in the aftermath of this monster's destruction, the spirit just looks at him and says, That was stupid. And then it manifests itself into Doctor Doom. But there's a caveat to this, and I'm curious to pick your brain on what this is. But it manifests itself into Doctor Doom, and it says, you should have listened to me. And so at that point, Alexander starts calling out to Sophia because the Eye of Khonshu is just sitting there, right? And he says, Sophia, help me, right? You can trust me. Please believe me. And that's when the Spectre shifts into Sophia's father and says, you don't need him, my darling daughter. I always told you to stand up for yourself. That principle is why we ended up in the work camps. Alexander has been telling you what to do all this time when you are the true leader. You are the one Latveria needs, and the Eye of Khonshu will light the way to power. And so you pick up with this moment that's almost out of Love, Death, and Robots, right? In Vaulted Halls Entombed, where you basically have her leaving this place, but instead of muttering some language supposedly possessed by Chthon, instead the monologue tells us Doom is gone, but his treasures remain, and so does his magic, including this shape-shifting specter, capable of carrying on his war and his will through others. Armed with the Eye of Khonshu, this rebel might become a conqueror. Now, that's the caveat. Is this person possessed by Doctor Doom, or are they operating of their own accord? That's kind of what we're left with here, because you don't really see the Spectre around in this final shot. And so if Sophia is operating of her own accord, then it's a complete and total reworking of the character of Doctor Doom, even if only temporary. Marvel's certainly done this multiple times before, but if it's Doctor Doom possessing her, then that's Doctor Doom's way out. And so at that point, we switch over to the Wakandan. This is the story of a guy named Umbra. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that Umbra is very mysterious here. We know almost nothing about this guy, but all we really know here is that he is working alongside a god named Nagiku, and that as a Wakandan, seemingly standing apart from T'Challa and the rest of the Wakandans, although again, his story is very murky, he ended up traveling, or at least was sent, to the Dungeons of Doom in order to attain an artifact. In this particular instance, it was the skull-shaped herb that gives him access to the shadowlands of the ancestral realm. Now, here's something that I want to point out here, and I think this does bear discussing because I've seen this online and there's like a huge misinterpretation when it comes to this. So a lot of people assume that while the ancestral plane does exist now in Marvel Comics, that it was introduced in Marvel in response to what the Marvel Cinematic Universe did. It's actually the opposite, that the ancestral plane as we know it, which is to say the realm of Djalia, was introduced in Ta-Nehisi Coates' run of Black Panther and Nation Under Our Feet. Prior to that point, whenever T'Challa was communicating with his ancestors, he would go to the necropolis where his ancestors were buried, and their spirits would appear to him, and then he would converse with them, and so on and so forth. When this was introduced, or at least the ancestral plane was introduced, if you go back and you look at Black Panther Volume 6, issues 2 and 8, what you end up realizing here is that number one, this place had long since been forgotten, that not even T'Challa knew about this place. That's stated in issue number 2. In issue number 8, when T'Challa is traveling there, he talks about how after Shuri had been killed in the events of Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, my god, going into Secret Wars 2015, that where there was an attempt in the aftermath of that, going into the new Black Panther run, to restore her following her essential death, that Black Panther, in looking at her, had realized her physical form was a doorway to another place. And that's when he realized this realm had long since been forgotten as well. And while again, he does travel there to save Shuri, while Shuri's there, she learns any number of abilities. Her knowledge of everything expands, because the ancestral plane is not simply a place where an individual can communicate with their ancestors, it holds all the collective knowledge of Wakanda's history. So to travel there is to learn everything there is to learn about Wakanda. It was a way for Ta-Nehisi Coates to effectively create a kind of back-end access point in order to provide this whole history of Wakanda that we didn't know about before. Nation Under Our Feet was a really, really good run. I'm pretty sure we covered it when it first came out, but it was a phenomenal story. But the point is, this area here is almost like the underbelly of it, right? Because the skull-shaped herb is not the same as the heart-shaped herb. It's the antithesis to the heart-shaped herb. And so that's why we're told the grasslands within the Shadowland were dead and ashen, and the acacia tree that welcomed him was as bone white as a skeleton. Nagiku had promised him a reunion, because the question he has here is, where is my love, right? Where is Hebo, the woman that I love so much? And he says, right, you promised me that she would be here and we could be together. Keeping in mind, with this being the spirit realm, he's here in a spirit form. His physical body is still back on Earth, inside the dungeons. But that's when a voice calls out to him, right? And it's her, right? It's his love. And she just calls out, you shouldn't have come here, right? And he says, I'm here to bring you back. And she says, it's too late for me, Umbra. You need to go. Go back while you still can. Because when he looks on, he sees Nagiku there, right? And Nagiku tells him, you wanted her back. Here she is. And that's where she tells Umbra, this is not where ancestors are honored, it's where they're banished. Now, this is a very important part of Wakandan history because seemingly it indicates that there are people out there who have operated in service of Nagiku before Umbra. Now, we don't definitively know if that's the case, but seemingly it's all those individuals who do show up in the ancestral plane properly, for lack of a better word, are all the Black Panthers who operated in the service of Bast. But here, it's totally different. Now again, this mythos is being built up, it's being expanded. And so what ends up happening is you get this moment out of like Witches, essentially, where she disappears into the tree and Umbra goes running up, right? And he says, I am not leaving without you. But then it says, something took hold of his arm, but it was not her. The dead watched the living as if through the pane of a filthy window. Nagiku, the trickster demon, had waited a long time, whispering and tapping on the glass, until he found the one who could not only break him free with the skull-shaped herb, but give him a body worth inhabiting. The doors to the dungeons have been flung open, and their shadows can now claim the world. Because one of the things to know about Umbra is that while I wouldn't say that Philip Kennedy Johnson has been doing it directly, Marvel seems to be moving in the direction of presenting him as almost a kind of opposite of T'Challa. I don't know if I'd say Eric Killmonger, but opposite of T'Challa. Potentially someone vying for the throne of Wakanda. Now, I'm not going to take that as an absolute, and neither should you, but that seems to be what they're going for. And so at this point, we switch over to the Hydra agents and the hammer that's being presented as the antithesis to Mjolnir. Now, this has been cool the entire time it's been going on. You guys see why the story's so dope. What ends up happening here is that this is the hammer of Sviksemi, and I'm probably screwing that up. But if you guys recall, in the first couple of issues that we covered, the way this worked is that as the Hydra agents were traveling through and trying to plunder the resources of Doom, the hammer started whispering, and only one person was able to hear it. But the hammer was kind of telling them, right, you should pick me up. You're the only one that can wield me. So much so that, in fact, everybody else who was there couldn't hear the hammer. It was only speaking to one person. But by and by, as we saw the events transpire, we began to realize there's a nefarious nature to this hammer. Those who pick it up seem to become corrupted by it and just seem to be filled with murder and paranoia, right? That's really what it is. Because at this moment right now, Manx is the one that has the hammer. And he says, I hear it now. Valence. It says, I was the worthy one, never you. Not you, not sniveling wills. And his response here is, what are you talking about? Like, why me? And he says, not even the masters of Hydra. He says, Sviksemi was mine all along. But that's when soldiers show up here and end up opening fire on the Hydra agents. Now, the crazy thing about this is they open fire on Manx and he doesn't die. In fact, he seems to get some measure of protection to a degree from the hammer. Of course, Wills ends up bailing out, right? He gets out of there as fast as he possibly can. And at that moment, Manx ends up firing off the energy of the hammer directly at these soldiers and kills them all. And the whole time he screams, you will not take it from me. So it's very Gollum-like from Lord of the Rings. It's an obsession, right? The hammer belongs to him. It's supposed to be his. You see what I'm talking about, right? Paranoia, murder, that kind of thing. And he says, I hear your mind, Wills, little weakling. The hammer warned me of you. And he says, Manx, right? Please, I do not even want your hammer. But that's when you get the origin of it, as short as it is. And Manx says, the blood of a dwarven smith of Svartalheim is in the metal. Did you know that? Right? Beaten and tortured, forced to forge a weapon worthy of Mjolnir. He made the hammer, but bled a curse into it to punish Doom and his torturers. He named the hammer Sviksemi, treachery. The wielder of this hammer is cursed ever to be betrayed. And so he says, you will not take it from me, because that's the curse, right? He's driven to believe anybody wants to take it. But more so than that, it makes perfect sense Doctor Doom would do something like this. The Hammer of Thor, Mjolnir, is one of the most coveted weapons in the entirety of the Marvel Universe, right? I mean, there's certainly weapons more powerful than that, and artifacts more powerful than that. The Casket of Ancient Winters is incredibly powerful. There's, of course, things like the Cosmic Cube or the Infinity Gauntlet that dwarf the power of Mjolnir. But nonetheless, those who lift the hammer are capable of incredible feats. Although I would go so far as to say, Doctor Doom's need to lift the hammer is less about having greater power and more about just feeling worthy, right? Something external validating what he doesn't feel internally. But nonetheless, Manx loses it. He looks at Wills and then just again says, "You will not take it from me," and attacks him with the hammer. But in that moment, when he goes in for the blow, the whole place starts crumbling around them, right? It betrayed Isildur to his death. That's literally what we're talking about here, right? That's what you usually run into when it comes to weapons like this. Weapons that are born and bred in betrayal are weapons that usually betray the wielder, or in some capacity, drive the wielder to become a darker version of themselves, or potentially even to madness. The Ebony Blade is a good example of that. And so where a giant rock ends up just crash landing onto the head of Manx and kills him on the spot, Wills starts slipping down into this hole, and the hammer falls in with him. And once he hits the ground, the hammer lands on him. But he can't push it off, right? He can't remove it. He can't get rid of it. He can't even lift it. And so at that point, when he's just kind of suffocating and dying in the cave below the dungeons, he just kind of laughs and says, "It was mine after all, Manx. I'm finally worthy." And so at that point, we switch to the final story. And this is the one that, again, deals with the Whisper Man, who was presented to us as this mutant so incredibly dangerous, the only thing they could do was lock him up. So again, we're covering this in reverse because this is actually chapter 1. Now, one of the things to remember is that with the Whisper Man, his entire existence really seems to be more confined to a device than anything else. So one of the things that we're kind of being presented with here is the fact that the Whisper Man isn't necessarily even a tangible being. He's a force, a concept that exists out there, but can seemingly possess other people, which makes him more dangerous when you think about it. And so that's what's been happening here. And one of the crazy things that I wasn't even aware of, that one of you guys pointed out, he's speaking Haitian Creole, which I didn't even know was a language, to be honest. I didn't even know to look that up as a language. I guess I could have just Google translated the text from the comic, but nonetheless, everyone who is possessed by the Whisper Man ultimately ends up exploding, right? They die, and the Whisper Man just jumps from one person to the next. Those who hear the sound will be possessed by him. And in fact, that's what these soldiers say, right? That sound, it came out of him. Like physically, it left his body. And that's what they're saying, right? I can still hear it, not just in my ears, right? I feel his presence in my bones. And they say it's getting louder, right? I don't want to die, man. Like, not this way. This is not how I envision myself going out. And that's a crazy thing, right? Because they say, we have to get out of here, man, as fast as we possibly can. And that's when you start to realize that with all this panic setting in here, if they simply just bail, if they just run out of here as fast as they can, none of them being possessed, at least in this moment, it will spread. And if it spreads across the town, it can spread across the country. And if that happens, it'll spread across the world. Containment is the only way to keep this thing under control. And so that is when you start to hear the voice again. Because Tompkins is the guy who's possessed in this moment. And Tompkins tries to take off, right? The voice, right? The Whisper Man is trying to escape, and he's using the soldiers to do it. And that's one of the coolest things about this. This is all happening. One of the things to remember is this story from the first issue to now is all happening within a matter of, I don't know, maybe 5, potentially 10 minutes. It's all happening in a very short amount of time. And so when he tries to take off, he gets shot in the backside, and that's when everybody else is possessed as well. So in that moment, Simmons, who's the last surviving guy that's not possessed, ends up radioing in to Thunderbolt Ross, because keep in mind, Red Hulk is here as well, and he's kind of been traveling through and investigating things on his own, essentially separate from the soldiers. It's not necessarily an abandonment thing. Keep in mind, General Thunderbolt Ross cares intensely for whatever soldiers are under his command. He values their lives as much as he values his own. It's simply just the awareness of the fact that these guys should be able to take care of themselves. not knowing that they were stumbling into the path of a mutant so powerful, it took the combined efforts of Emma Frost, Charles Xavier, and Jericho Drumm to contain this guy. And so when he radios in, he says, General Ross, right, leave us, get to the surface. The device that we have held some kind of an organism, and we let it out. We are all infected. It lives in some kind of melody, and it kills the host. It spreads through sound when it dies, and it's getting louder. Don't worry, I will not let it out again. And he just says, don't come for us. And so at that point, you hear a gunshot, and an hour later, Red Hulk shows up on the scene, and he just asks, right, Simmons, where are you? Like calling out to him the entire time, only for him to get in here and find out that all these guys are basically dead. But then he thinks about what he was told before. It spreads through sound. So he fills his ears with dirt so that nothing can penetrate his ears. That's a really, really smart maneuver. Technically, it makes him deaf, but again, he can still see. And for someone like Red Hulk, that's really more important, I think, in a lot of ways. But he just kind of looks around, right? Major Simmons, right? Where in the world are you? But as he looks around, he ends up seeing all this blood, right? Just kind of pouring down this little access hole to the cave. And when he gets out of it, there's all these people who are here within Latveria, right? Hurry, please. The foundation is collapsing. The tool chest and the generator are still inside. Misha and Javi, get the children's bags from the back room. All their winter clothes. We need all of it because winter in Latveria is harsh. But that is when Simmons shows up on the scene, and Simmons starts speaking. And seemingly from the little glimpses that we got of the history of the Whisperman, specifically when he was confronted by Emma Charles and Jericho Drumm, this is exactly what happened before. He ended up creating a kind of cult following around himself. He didn't really seem to expand beyond that, right, to attain any kind of schemes on world domination, and maybe he intended to. Again, we know almost nothing about this guy's story outside of how dangerous he is. But Thunderbolt Ross shows up here and just says, Major, Simmons, stop. And Simmons immediately starts speaking, right, in that kind of melodic tone. And so in that moment, Thunderbolt Ross is faced with a conundrum. On one hand, he's got Simmons, but he knows the Whisperman spreads through sound. So if he kills Simmons right now, all that's going to happen is it's going to jump to another host. And if he kills that host, it'll jump to another. It's what makes the Whisperman so dangerous. So he does the only thing he can do. He grabs two cars and smashes them together. And while they do kill Simmons, right, just the sheer force of impact, the actual sound reverberation that comes out of it deafens everyone there. And so at that point, all the citizens start freaking out, right? I mean, Simmons is dead, but all the citizens start panicking, right? I can't hear anything, right? Everybody keeps saying the same thing. You bastard, you've struck us deaf, right? I can't hear anything. And at that point, Red Hulk just says, I'm sorry, Simmons, you deserved better than this. But when he looks down inside of him, he sees that the Whisperman is at least momentarily contained. And so in that moment, as he's walking away, one of the women starts screaming at him, right? Like, she's deaf, my only child. You have broken us. You have broken all of us. But the response of the Red Hulk is, my men died so you could live broken. Count your blessings in your brokenness and pray that I do not come back for you. Now, here's the kicker behind all of this, and there's a lot that we don't know and what's coming out of this. For those of you guys who are kind of getting caught up with it all, the Dungeons of Doom are the aftermath to Doctor Doom dying, right? That he literally is no longer alive in Marvel Comics. His spirit form is seemingly here, or at least by way of magic, there's essentially a remnant of him here, but Doctor Doom as we know him is gone. But there's a lot of plot threads to spin out of this. Number one, we have this new alternate version of Mjolnir. That's probably going to appear in the Mortal Thor storyline somewhere down the road. This whole idea is probably going to transition into an X-Men storyline. Everything with Umbra is going to lead into Wakanda. The real question here is what's going on with Sophia? What role will she play? So what I'm curious about from you guys, right, is do you think Sophia is going to end up being a new version of Doctor Doom in Marvel Comics? Or do you think Sophia is just going to be a person who is ultimately defeated at some point, and that's basically it? I'm kind of curious, right? Because keep in mind, she's got the Eye of Khonshu, right? Is that going to spin out into the Moon Knight series? These are questions we don't have the answer to, but I am curious to see what you guys think. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.